The infirmary at Galactic Cooperative Academy smelled like antiseptic and something else, something older, harder to name. Naira noticed it on her first visit, when she'd come in with a sprained wrist after a zero-gravity training exercise. She hadn't thought much of it then. She thought about it now. The human nurse, Nurse Calloway, the intake form said, first name Margaret, age 53, was unwrapping a sterile dressing with the calm, unhurried efficiency of someone who had done the same motion 10,000 times. She wasn't looking at Naira. She was watching the door. Always watching the door. Naira had grown up studying xenobehavioral cues. Her species, the Velarath, were diplomats by instinct and analysts by training. She noticed things. She cataloged them. She had been cataloging Nurse Calloway for 6 weeks. It started with Kalen. Kalen was Naira's closest friend at the academy. A Dreth, broad-shouldered and scaled, from a warrior caste that could trace its military lineage back 11 generations. He thought humans were soft. Not cruelly, just honestly. He'd grown up being taught that Earth was a mid-tier planet with emotional complexity, but physical limitations. He'd been taught that humans were best utilized in negotiation, translation, cultural mediation. He'd revised that opinion slightly after watching a human cadet punch through a sparring dummy designed for Dreth physiology. He hadn't revised it enough. So when Kalen limped into the infirmary with a torn muscle along his shoulder ridge, a serious injury for a Dreth, the kind that took weeks to heal, he expected sympathy, perhaps mild competence. He got something else entirely. Nurse Calloway had looked at the injury for exactly 2 seconds. Sit, she said. Kalen sat. He would later be unable to fully explain why. She'd worked in silence, her hands moving with a precision that Kalen, who had trained under 3 decorated Dreth field surgeons, recognized as field-grade efficiency. Not clinic efficiency, not academic efficiency, the kind that developed when a medic had to assess, prioritize, and act without the luxury of time or equipment. The kind that lived in muscle memory because thinking too long got people killed. You've done this before, Kalen said. Not a question. Wrap it twice, she replied, handing him the pressure bandage. You Dreth always try to wrap once and call it done. Twice. And don't train on it for 8 days. I heal faster then. 8 days. He wrapped it twice. He took 8 days. It healed cleaner than any shoulder injury he'd ever had before. He mentioned it to Naira, casually, the way you mention something you haven't stopped thinking about. Naira started paying closer attention after that. The infirmary was a natural gathering point at the academy. Students of 14 different species passed through it for everything from routine vaccinations to zero-G disorientation. Naira began visiting more than strictly necessary. A headache here. A precautionary check-in there. She told herself she was being thorough about her health. She was watching Nurse Calloway's hands. The scars were difficult to see at first. Human skin tones obscured them. Calloway was pale in the way of people who had once spent a lot of time outdoors and now spent most of their time indoors, and the scars had faded to thin silver lines, almost decorative at a glance. Almost. There was one along the left forearm, long, surgical in straightness, the kind left by something that had entered at speed rather than dragged. There was a cluster near the collarbone that Naira could only see when Calloway's collar shifted, small, dense, overlapping. Old. There was one at the jaw, mostly hidden beneath the angle of her face, the shape of it suggesting something that had not been a clean injury. Naira had studied military medicine as part of her diplomatic curriculum. She knew what combat trauma looked like on a body. She did the count one afternoon while Calloway was charting quietly at her desk. 14 visible scars, possibly more beneath the uniform. The highest decorated Dreth General Naira had ever met in person had 7. She asked Kalen if he knew anything about human military history. He pulled up what the Academy database had. It was not a short document. Naira read through it over 2 nights. She'd learned the broad outlines before. The world wars, the colonial period, the slow and grinding century of near-extinction events that Earth had pulled itself back from through sheer obstinate refusal to die. She knew humans had survived ice ages, plagues, volcanic winters, and their own weapons technology turning on them. What she hadn't fully absorbed was the specifics. Human combat history wasn't just long. It was continuous. Barely a generation in recorded history where some portion of the species hadn't been in active armed conflict somewhere on the planet. They had fought with rocks, and then with bronze, and then with iron, and then with gunpowder, and then with things that cracked the atom open like a seed pod and scattered fire across entire cities. And through all of it, some humans had kept walking into the worst of it to carry the wounded out. Military medics, combat nurses, field surgeons operating under fire with instruments that would have seemed primitive to any galactic cooperative medical facility. She closed the document. She looked at the infirmary door for a long time. She finally asked directly, because Velarath diplomacy had one absolute rule: when you need to know something, you ask. She waited until the infirmary was empty. Calloway was reorganizing a supply cabinet, moving things with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything. "Nurse Calloway," Naira said. "Were you in the military?" A pause. Not surprised. More like someone who had been waiting for the question to eventually arrive. "2 tours," Calloway said. She didn't stop organizing the cabinet. "Forward surgical unit. Then a mobile trauma team." "Where?" Calloway named 2 regions on Earth. Naira didn't know the specific places, but she recognized the conflict designations from the database. Active war zones. Dense urban fighting. The kind of terrain where casualties came in faster than they could be processed and medics made triage decisions that they carried in their chests for the rest of their lives. "Why are you here?" Naira asked. Then, realizing how that sounded. "I mean, at the academy. You could work anywhere." Calloway finally turned around. She was a compact woman, not particularly imposing by any physical metric, shorter than Naira, lighter than Kalen by a significant margin. But she looked at Naira with eyes that had looked at worse things than a curious Velarath student, and her expression was patient in a way that had been built rather than born. "Because here," she said, "nobody's shooting." It was the simplest sentence Naira had heard in months. She told Kalen that evening. He was quiet for longer than usual. 14 scars, he said finally. "At minimum." Another silence. "When I was injured," he said slowly, "she knew exactly what to do. Not from reading Dreth anatomy. She knew, like she had seen it before. The Academy treats 14 species," Naira said. "She's been here 11 years. Kalen shook his head. "That's not what I mean. She knew how to move around me, how to stand so I wouldn't feel trapped, how to give the instruction before I could argue." He paused. "That's not clinic training. That's casualty management. She was treating me like a battlefield case." He said it without insult, with something closer to recognition. "She assessed me in 2 seconds and made a complete decision," he continued. "I have watched decorated Dreth field commanders take longer." Naira thought about the door, the way Calloway always watched it. Not with fear. She had seen fear, had studied it across 14 species. This was something else. Readiness. The permanent low hum of a system that had once needed to be always on and had never fully switched off. "She came here because nobody is shooting," Naira said. "But I think part of her is still in the field. Still running the calculations." Kalen looked at his shoulder, the one Calloway had wrapped. "The Dreth have a word," he said quietly. "Verithka." It means, roughly, a warrior who has chosen peace but has not forgotten war. He paused. "We use it with respect. Considerable respect. Does it translate to other species?" "I did not think it needed to," Kalen said. "Until now." The next morning, Naira stopped by the infirmary. Not for a headache. Not for a check-in. She brought a small arrangement of something that passed for flowers on her homeworld. Pale, structural blooms that her people offered to those they wished to honor. Calloway looked at them. Looked at Naira. "What's this for?" "Verith Ka," Naira said carefully, trying to get the Dreth pronunciation right. Calloway didn't know the word. Naira explained it. There was a long quiet in the infirmary. Outside, the academy went about its morning. Cadets from a dozen worlds moving through corridors, arguing about coursework, living the ordinary loud life of students who had never had to watch a door. Calloway took the flowers. She set them on the corner of her desk, beside the antiseptic and the pressure bandages and the charts of 14 different species biology. "Thank you," she said. She said it simply. Then she went back to work. Some wars end. Some warriors find somewhere quieter to stand. The scars remain either way, not as wounds, but as record, as proof. Nurse Calloway knew 43 ways to keep someone alive under fire. Here, she only needed one: show up. Every day, without fail. That, the students slowly came to understand, was also a kind of courage.